In addition, adaptive capacity is the ability of a nonprofit organization to ensure the effective and efficient use of organizational resources. This fits under operational capacity as well. The nonprofit organization should be able to ensure that the resources are used effectively and efficiently. Whether there are changes in the organization that require reallocation of particular resources, or whether there are changes in the operation that require the reallocation of resources. A nonprofit agency needs capacity to ensure the effective and efficient use of the organizational resources. And finally, a nonprofit organization has to have the ability to implement all of the key organizational and programmatic functions. So this is under adaptive capacity because, again, these implementations are required regardless of the changes that occur. The nonprofit agency has to have the ability to implement all the organizational and programmatic functions, but this fits as well under the technical capacity. Those are the four core capacities that are required of every nonprofit agency. Now let's take a look at some of the typical organizational needs. Typical organizations need financial management. They'll need legal assistance. They'll need facility planning. They'll need fund development. They'll need communications, governance training, program design and development. They'll need advocacy. They'll need human resources management and training, strategic planning, leadership training, technology. They'll need operation support. They'll need organizational development, and they'll need ethics education. So these are the 15 typical organizational needs. Again, there's financial management, there's legal assistance, facility planning, fund development, communications, governance training, program decision and development, advocacy, human resources management and training, strategic planning, leadership training, technology, operation support, organizational development, and ethics education. These are the 15 typical organizational needs that are inherent in the majority of any nonprofit agency. Without these, let's call them resources, it'll be very difficult for a nonprofit agency to achieve its mission. It'll be very difficult for a nonprofit agency to implement goals, to implement tasks, to implement activities, etc. These are the basic overall resources that the majority of nonprofit agencies would need. Now, the typical activities that an organization may need in order to develop its capacity would be board development. They may need assistance in evaluation, executive coaching, strategic planning. They may need to build capacity in their ability to maintain fiscal systems, human resources, information technology, leadership development, program evaluation, resource development, and succession planning. Program evaluation is different than the evaluation in a sense that the broader evaluation would apply to the broader agency, as opposed to program evaluation applies to this particular program. So again, there's board development, evaluation, executive coaching, strategic planning, fiscal systems, human resources, information technology, leadership development, program evaluation, resource development, and succession planning. These are the 12 typical activities that an organization would want to develop a capacity building program to focus on. Now, the process for capacity building is typically starting off with a needs assessment, followed by an orientation, forming peer groups, developing a theory of change and a logic model, designing evaluation systems, and then capacity building plan development. So step one is figuring out what the needs are. Step two is orientation, describing what the needs are. Next, the nonprofit agency would form peer groups. The peer groups would develop a theory of change and develop a logic model. We've covered the logic model extensively, but the gist of it is assessing what inputs are needed to achieve particular outputs. Then, in order to assess if the program is running effectively, that's the capacity building program, they'd have to pre-develop an evaluation system. And then they'd actually go ahead and develop the capacity building plan. That's the typical process. Now, why doesn't capacity building happen naturally? So, there are a lot of reasons, but these are the 6 general reasons. Number one, the program takes priority over building the program's capacity. Meaning that if the program per se is running, then that takes priority over trying to change the program, even though the program itself lacks the capacity to accomplish particular aspects of the mission. Another reason why capacity building doesn't happen is because there's a lack of understanding. There's a lack of knowledge in what the capacity actually should be. And there may be a lack of knowledge as well. There may be a lack of knowledge in what the capacity of the program actually is. Another reason is awareness of options, simply because we won't know of any other options aside from the way things are running right now. A fourth reason, and probably the most common reason, is just a lack of time and money. As a subset of that, funders, the agency's current funders, don't pay for capacity building programs. And the agency, in an attempt to fulfill its proposed project for which they're being funded, can't deviate from that plan. And finally, there's silo behavior. These are the typical 6 obstacles to capacity building. Again, the program is a priority, lack of understanding, awareness of options, the cost, the money and time, funders won't pay for it, and silo behavior. Now, just to get a better picture of why capacity building is crucial in any agency, let's take a look at the typical life cycle of any agency. So every agency has 4 stages. There's the startup stage, there's the growth stage, there's the mature stage, and then there's the defunct stage. Now, the focus of the agency from startup to growth is core program development. The focus of the agency between the growth stage and mature stage is infrastructure development. At the mature stage itself, the focus of the agency is expanding the impact. Once the agency reaches this point, typically between the mature stage and the defunct stage, the agency has no particular focus. The agency is just trying to maintain the programs they've developed, the infrastructure they've developed, and the expanded impact that they've developed. So things remain stagnant. When things remain stagnant, the agency winds up with a mission that drifts into irrelevance, simply because society changes. And missions that were relevant in the 1950s are irrelevant today. Similarly, missions that are relevant today will be irrelevant tomorrow. And that drives the agency into a defunct phase. So every agency, once it hits the maturity stage, will typically need to expand its capacity just to avoid remaining stagnant. Being stagnant automatically leads into the mission drifting into irrelevance. So in order to facilitate an expanded mission, in order to facilitate a mission that focuses on current relevant social issues, the agency will have to expand its capacity. So that's just to give a picture of why capacity building is necessary. So that's the basic nonprofit life cycle. Again, the 4 stages of an agency are the startup stage, the growth stage, the maturity stage, and then the defunct stage. The focus of the agency during those stages, so between the startup and growth stage, the agency will focus on core program development. Between the growth stage and the maturity stage, the agency will focus on developing their infrastructure. At the point that the agency hits the maturity stage, they'll try to expand their impact. Once they've expanded their impact, the agency typically will fall into a stagnant mode. When the agency falls into a stagnant mode, that leads into the mission drifting, and that leads into the mission becoming irrelevant, which leads to the agency becoming defunct. And again, this happens in all agencies simply because society changes. When society changes, the missions have to follow. And that's why it's crucial for an agency to have adaptive capacity. And again, adaptive capacity is the umbrella for the operational capacity and technical capacity. But an agency needs to have that adaptive capacity simply to avoid falling into stagnant mode.